Mammography is controversial because of questions about its efficacy and its one-size-fits-all approach, and critics of mammography point to the need for a more personalized approach. A few years ago, one possible solution was 3D mammography. So researchers did what researchers do. They started a study to prove definitively that 3D mammography was better than two-dimensional. But by the time the study was ramping up, 3D had become so much more widely used and accepted that the researchers had a problem. There was no one to enroll in their $100 million trial. This is Blood and Cancer, our show about clinical trends and research in oncology, hematology, and patient care. I'm your host, Nick Andrews. In this episode, what happens when a $100 million study can't recruit? Remember, Blood and Cancer is available wherever podcasts are found. You can email the show at podcasts@mdedge.com. Nick Mulcahy covers oncology for Medscape. He's been doing that for some time, and he's been reporting on TMIST for years.
TMIST is a trial that dates back to 2012 in its early planning stages. And that's where the trouble began.
In 2019, Nick was scrolling through Twitter when he found something unusual. An oncologist from Maine was complaining that he could not get radiologists interested in joining the TMIST trial.
I've been reporting for Medscape as an oncology reporter for 12 years, and I've never seen an investigator of a major study go on to a public space and say, I can't find fellow doctors to join me in this clinical trial. That was unusual to hear directly from an investigator that they were having a hard time getting other physicians to join their trial.
TMIST stands for Tomosynthesis Mammography Imaging Screening Trial. As we mentioned, it was designed to treat 2D and 3D mammography to look for survival. Nick says the problems were clear from the beginning.
During the course of the planning for the trial, this technology, which at the start of the planning had a very minimal presence, suddenly became big. And so now you had a question of, we're running a clinical trial to see if one thing's better than the other. And one of the technologies, the 2D technology, is fading from the scene. So how relevant is this? Becomes a question that the NCI finally, as of a couple months ago, started to ask.
The NCI did indeed start to ask questions about just how feasible the study is and how well $100 million in American tax money was being spent. What they had to say after this. Welcome back to Blood and Cancer. TMIST was meant to definitively compare 2D and 3D mammography for breast cancer screening. But as 3D became so obviously better, it became more prevalent. So much so that the trial had problems.
There were two evident problems to me immediately after I started reporting this. Number one, they didn't have enough patients. And number two, they didn't have enough sites. And the sites that they had weren't enrolling enough.
The TMIST situation had become an open secret in the months leading up to 2019 and 2020. So in September of last year, the National Cancer Institute had a meeting of its expert advisory board, which is a public event. The meeting was something else. So what exactly happened?
There was a review of the trial and how it was doing in a public forum, the National Cancer Advisory Board. And during that review, something extraordinary happened. The man at the NCI, who's in charge of all the clinical trials for prevention and screening of cancer, questioned the feasibility and relevance of the trial. Given that the fact that the trial's been underway for over 2 years, and planned for the previous 5 years, that was a hell of an admission. And in the course of that meeting as well, Ned Sharpless, who's the director of the National Cancer Institute, said, there's no easy way to do this. And he was referring to questioning the feasibility and relevance of this huge $100 million trial. And he said, enrollment for this trial, getting patients to join, has been a problem from the very start. to hear all of that in a public forum is both healthy for democracy and healthy for the flow of information, but it's a little surprising.
And just how unique or unusual was that moment?
The longer you cover academic medicine, and I cover both community practice as well as academic practice in oncology, you see academic medicine is a very closed world and people are very cautious about how they speak. So here were two folks that are affiliated with the academic world at the NCI making very frank statements about a $100 million expenditure.
So Nick, I'm curious, as the NCI figures this out, what's the biggest remaining question?
Why didn't they kill this thing a while ago? Why did the NCI go ahead and spend all this money on something that more than a few years ago, it was clear that it was, a dicey proposition. They've just extended, they've given it lots of chances to get better, and it hasn't. Do you know, Nick, they were supposed to recruit 5,500 women a month. At their best, they recruited 1 month, 1,700 women. So they were averaging like 1,500 a month. So they weren't even close to their monthly goals. Yet the trial continued. Yet they continued to look for new sites. Yet they reached out to South America and Asia to try to find new sites to recruit patients. It just wasn't working.
You can read Nick's report on TMIST and the fallout by clicking the links in the show notes. Blood and Cancer is produced by MD Edge editor Jennifer Smith. It's produced by our executive editor as well, Kathy Scarbeck. The host of the interview portions of the show is Dr. David Henry. I'm your audio engineer, audio editor, and the host of Blood and Cancer News, Nick Andrews.